Olá, boa noite a todos, sejam muito bem-vindos. Meu nome é Giovanni Justino, sou diretor executivo do Lideranças nas Escolas e hoje, dando início à nossa programação de webinars do ano de 2021, nós temos a honra de contar com a presença mais que ilustre de Deirdre McCloskey, com o tema O Grande Enriquecimento e o Mundo Moderno. Autora de 24 livros e mais de 400 artigos, a Deirdre é PhD em Economia pela Universidade de Harvard e professora emérita de Economia, História, Língua Inglesa e Comunicação da Universidade de Illinois, em Chicago. Professor McCloskey, the word is yours.
Thank you, dear. I just love the sound of Portuguese. I also like Portuguese food, not Portuguese, Brazilian food, Brazilian music, and the sound of Portuguese. I just wish I understood the language. All I know how to say is obrigada. That's it. That's it. Si. I know how to say si. Look, I have an argument that I make at great length in 3 big, thick volumes from 2006 and 2010, 2016. And then last year, Art Carden and I wrote a kind of condensed version. And the condensed version is called Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich. Leave me alone and I'll make you rich. How the so-called bourgeois deal enriched the world. And it's the theme of my work that the key to an expanding economy and indeed to a free society, free for queers, free for blacks, free, is his liberalism. Now, of course, in Latin America, the word liberal has been distorted. It means conservative often. In the United States, it kind of means the opposite. It means democratic socialism. But when I use the word, I mean it in the old sense, in the sense of Adam Smith, the blessed Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, and other 19th century and 18th century liberals, and indeed in the sense of my former colleague at the University of Chicago, Milton Friedman. And the basic idea of liberalism is permission. Not so much that we start with equal opportunities. That's almost impossible when you start thinking about it. I mean, look, many of you are more intelligent than I am. All of you speak more languages than I do. I have a Spanish joke, which I like to give, which is, you know, a person who knows 3 languages is called trilingual. Someone who knows 2 is called bilingual. Someone who knows 1 is called una gringa. So there, you undoubtedly, a great number of you are more intelligent than I am. So how are we going to achieve equality? We could pound nails into your head until you forgot how to speak English, say. Well, that you can kind of see that that's a pretty stupid way of organizing a society. Equality is not the point. That is equality of result. You know, you people know how to speak English. I don't know how to speak Portuguese. That's an inequality of result. But that's not the point. The point is equality of permission. If I wanted to, or was able to, I would be able to learn Portuguese, and then you and I would be equal in that respect. The same is true of income. Focusing on income equality, I know it's a very big issue in Brazil and in my country that we share that so-called problem. That's not the problem. The problem is lack of permission. If you have occupational licenses, for example, that the state gives out, the state now. That means that some people are prevented from becoming doctors or lawyers, accountants, or economists for that matter. And that's bad. We should have free entry. You are not permitted to buy some foreign products. That's protection, it's called. You know, protection in international trade. Have a wall around Brazil or around the United States. And that's also bad because you're not permitted to purchase what you want from the person who can supply it to you at the lowest price. And so it's permission that's the key. And the point is that until the 1700s, Northwest, especially Holland, and then their offshoots, and then France, and then Germany, and then the whole world, almost the whole world. This was not the case. Liberalism didn't exist. There was hierarchy, as there still is, you know, but it was worse. I can tell you, in the 1700s, there was the king or the nobles, the rich people, and then there was your ancestors and mine, the poor people. Mine were Irish and Norwegian and English. This was a terrible situation, but it was ancient. It had existed ever since the invention of agriculture, about 9,000 years ago. That is, there were landlords and there were peasants. And the two were fixed. You couldn't go to school and learn how to be a lord, learn how to be an aristocrat. Having a degree from university didn't help. You were still lower class. That started to change in the 1700s in places like, well, as I said, Holland, somewhat earlier, and then in England. And slowly, more and more people got permission to do things. Take the case of women, for example. Until the 1870s in England, a woman who married a man lost her property. It became his property entirely. If she was a great landowner, it didn't matter. He got it all. Indeed, he also got her children. If she decided to run away to France, he got the children. Indeed, if she wanted to get a divorce, suppose he was a terrible man and beat her all the time, and she wanted a divorce, she didn't get the children. And that changed under the Married Women's Property Act in 1874 in Britain. So slowly, as your country and mine share this history of slavery. In the United States, a great and terrible civil war in the 1860s ended slavery. In your own country, thank God, it was abolished by agreement in the 1880s. But it was in any case abolished. Serfdom was abolished in Russia in 1861. More and more people became free. That is, more and more people had permission to move from the Northeast to Rio or something for work, to move to the frontier in the United States, or indeed in Amazonia. So freedom of movement is very important here. Equality of freedom. Everyone had the right to go to Amazonia and start in the great boom in the 1890s. The rubber boom. Everyone had the right. At the same time, there was a great boom, a gold rush in Alaska and in Canada. And you didn't need the permission of the government to go to the gold fields. So it's this permission that distinguishes liberalism from all other philosophies. I think of the other philosophies, the socialism on the one hand and conservatism on the other, as the mother and father philosophies. The socialists claim that they're very nice and they're like your mama and they want to treat you very well and give you lots of stuff, free, free, free. Whereas the conservatives say, no, no, I'm your daddy, I'm your papa, you must behave yourself, right? So it's the mother versus the father. But observe, in both cases, you're the child. You're a child. You could call liberalism the theory of adultism. The theory that the best way for people to do well, to flourish, economically, spiritually, artistically, is to be adults. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have charities or help out poor people. Of course we should. But it means that we shouldn't stop permissions. Now, what does this have to do with my declared topic this afternoon? Namely, how we got rich over the last couple of centuries. Well, it goes like this. If you learn no historical fact in this talk, except the one I'm about to give, you'll know more than most students of the past know. You'll be an expert historian because many, many students of the past see the past in terms of conflict. When I was a Marxist, back when I was a teenager, the Communist Manifesto told me that the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. And I thought to myself, hey, that's great. Now I understand all history. That's the left wing, the socialist way of looking at the past. The conservative way of looking at the past is to say, isn't it terrible that the traditional society in which you were a milkmaid and you stayed a milkmaid forever, wow, it's terrible that that's broken down. And the church is not as important as it was. Oh, that's awful. How terrible. Whereas this fact, now here's the fact. I call it sometimes the great fact, is that since 1800, in Brazil as in the United States, income per head in real terms, the amount of bread or education or entertainment or housing that you can buy has increased, now hear the number, by 3,000%. It's actually a little less in Brazil, but not a lot less, maybe 2,000%. But that's a very great increase. That's a factor since 1800, an increase for the poorest people. This isn't just for the rich people. For the poorest people from this very, very poor state that everyone was in 1800, whoop, up by a factor times 30 or 20. In some countries, 40, 25. Enormous increases. Now, if you ask most people, ask your father. Well, you don't want to embarrass your father. So ask your mother. She's more tolerant. Ask her how much she thinks this real income per head, as economists say, this increase in the ability to buy things has gone up since 1800 for poor people. And she'll say, well, maybe it's increased 50%, 50. Or then if she's very smart, she'll say, well, more like 100 or maybe 200%. Oh no, mama. It's much bigger than that. It's 2,000%, 3,000%, 4,000% over the base. Now, What caused it? Well, it's so big that in understanding the science here, in explaining such a great fact, there are two sorts of explanations that don't make any sense because it's so big. If it was 50% or 100%, these two explanations would be, they'd be okay. One is exploitation. Exploitation. You say that modern Brazilians are rich because they exploited slaves. Or you say that England, Great Britain, is rich because it exploited India. Or you say that the West in general, the North and West in general, is rich because it exploits the global South. Now, I'm not going to argue whether or not there was exploitation. That's not the issue. In the case of slavery, yeah, it was exploitation to be seized from Africa and brought to Brazil to work in a sugar plantation, or to work in Jamaica, or to work in the United States. That's exploitation. I agree. But does it explain the enrichment of the enslavers? Now, you'd think, sure, gee, having a slave would be great. I could have the slave do my homework or clean my house, and that'd be wonderful. But it doesn't increase your income by 3,000%. You see, taking money or taking, goods or labor from someone else, and giving it to someone else, shifting stuff around, just shifts the distribution of the pie. Think of a pie. The economists always talk this way. A pie, which is the whole of the nation's income. And it's clear that if you take a piece of it and you give it to another part of the pie, then the people you've taken it from are worse off. The people you give it to are better off. But they're never 3,000% better off. That's not, and the problem is that it's the whole pie that gets better. The average person in Brazil since 1800 or 1900 or 1950, choose your dates, has gotten better and better off. In other words, the whole pie has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger by really an enormous amount. Let's think of the actual pie in Brazil in 1800 would be, a little teeny, let me put it up here, little teeny circle, little pie, little teeny pie. And then the modern pie is, well, I can't go far enough. It's way, way out here. It's an enormous increase. So exploitation doesn't work as an explanation. Indeed, think about it. If it did, I've taught in South Africa a little bit, and you could say, as the government did under apartheid. I didn't teach in that era, but after, when it became free, I did. The government said, well, we white people are better off if we exploit the blacks and what they called the coloreds. And if that were so, if the way to get rich was stealing from other people, admitting that slavery is stealing, then white Brazilians would be vastly better off than, say, let's pick a case, English people. Because English people didn't have slaves, not in modern times. Like free states in the United States, if you set foot as a black person on the land of England, land of Great Britain, you were free, and you couldn't be re-enslaved. So if slavery was the way forward, or colonial exploitation, the British, they got rich because they exploited India. Well, now wait a second. Austria-Hungary, the empire, didn't have foreign colonies. So why did it eventually get rich, as, say, Austria is now, or Sweden. Take Sweden. Sweden had a few colonies, very, very few. Some in the Pacific, one or two in the New World. It didn't amount to much. Yet, Swedish income also went up. So it can't be exploitation. So I promised that there were two explanations, both of which are wrong. And the other explanation is a more conservative one. It's investment. It says the way we got rich is investing in physical and human capital. If you're a student, you're investing in human capital. As the way economists express it, they say you're abstaining from consumption. You aren't in a full-time job, you're a full-time student, so you're not earning the income you could if you were in a full-time job. So that's one of the big costs of higher education. The 19-year, you wouldn't where so that's investing in human capital, and then roads and houses and factories and farms, cultivated farms, those are all investments in physical capital, or in land clearance, such as is going on the edge of Amazonia as we speak. Those are all investments. But what's the problem here? Surely these investments explain why we're so rich. And turns out to be a very deep fallacy. Unfortunately, it was a fallacy that was first stated by the blessed Adam Smith. He thought that capital accumulation was where the action was. Now, capital accumulation is necessary, unlike exploitation. Capital accumulation is necessary. But so is rainfall necessary. So is sunlight necessary. So is the existence of a labor force necessary for economic growth. So is law. All kinds of things are necessary for economic growth. But is the capital the cause? And here, the argument, the economic argument is this. If you were to just accumulate capital, pile one house on another, so to speak, take your own house or your parents' house. Suppose you just built another house next door, the same kind. Well, obviously, that'd be nice to have this extra house. You could have parties there and so forth, but it wouldn't be as valuable as the first house, right? And suppose you build a third house and a fourth and a fifth with no innovation, no change in what the house was used for, just you get bigger and bigger capital. Well, obviously, there's going to be what economists call diminishing returns, diminishing marginal returns, to be exact. The next house is much less valuable than the one before. And that's true in general. I live in an apartment building. There's an apartment building across the street. I can see it right now. You build another apartment building in my neighborhood, and the extra social or private value is lower and lower and lower. The more you do, you can overbuild, in other words, if there's no innovation, if there's not something new about these houses, something that makes them more productive of human satisfaction. So you see that capital accumulation is in the middle, so to speak. There's a cause down here that really causes everything to happen. And then there's capital accumulation, and then you get income. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient, to put it in logical terms. You have to have it, but that doesn't mean it's the cause. You decide to go swimming on the Copa in Rio, as I have. Obviously, the beach has to be there, but the beach isn't the cause of your swimming. It's your idea to go swim on the beach that pushes you, that say in English, or you must have it in Portuguese too, impels you. It's from Latin. That's what makes it happen. Now, of course, the beach is necessary, but as I said, it's not the cause. So then there are lots of other problems with this investment idea, this capital accumulation idea. By the way, the World Bank in Washington for decades thought that the way to make a country rich was to pour capital into it, pour it in, and then it would be rich. Add capital and stir was kind of their motto. It didn't work. The World Bank, and indeed Western investors in general, didn't give anything to communist China. Yet it grew very fast after 1978. And it gave a lot to Ghana in West Africa. And Ghana was, for a long time, had been a very rich, well, comparatively rich sub-Saharan African country, became very poor. So sheer capital just piled up like those extra houses I told you about is not going to do it. It's not what makes for enrichment. Okay, so now you got two parts. You got the definition and talk about what liberalism is. And you've got the two explanations, the two big ones that you'll hear from your economist teachers and colleagues and from historians and so forth. The two explanations, exploitation and capital accumulation, that don't work, that don't explain this amazing, enormous increase. In the end, I called it the Great Enrichment. The Great Enrichment has increased income per head in the world, even including now very poor countries, by at least a factor of 10. 10, whereas before, nothing like that happened. We would go along, you think of it this way, from the beginning of Homo sapiens, which is our race, we moved along for tens of thousands of years, and then way at the end, boom, now I have to go upward, zoom, well, I have to do it right. It's hard. It goes up like a rocket compared to before. Before, occasionally, there'd be doublings of income per capita, and then it would sink back. This happened a lot. In the Song Dynasty in China, that's what happened. But, it's not 100%, it's 3,000%. So what's going on? Why did it happen? Well, what can we say? The immediate cause was technological change. Not necessarily machines, although those are very, very important, but new ways of doing things. Innovation is the best word for it. In fact, the word capitalism is a very foolish word. It leads people off to think that capital accumulation is what's makes people rich, or you have to have capital. It's a very foolish word, but a much better word for what we do, what we have in the modern world, is innovism, because it's changing the way we do things and improving it that makes for this enormously expanded pie. A case that I like very much is containerization in ocean and trucking and rail shipping, where you have standard containers, 40 feet long by English measure, or 20 feet long, and you fill them with stuff from Brazil, you stick it on a ship and send it to China, and the Chinese fill it with Chinese stuff and send it back to Brazil. That has enormously cheapened the cost, especially of ocean transport, but also rail and trucking transport, because you don't need, we say, you don't need to break bulk. You don't need to take out the stuff and put it in another container and then another container. the one container gets filled in China and nothing gets taken out until it gets to, I don't know, the store practically in Brazil. So it's innovation, and it's biological innovations, such as we're experiencing right now with the vaccines against COVID. It's the invention of penicillin. The invention of genetic modified crops, and indeed before that, simply the selection of seed to get better and better crops and better animals. Those were all innovations. And indeed, sheer organizational innovations. The superhighway, we call them in the United States. The Autobahn in Germany. The idea came to some German engineers in the 1920s, and then was implemented in the 30s, alas, under Hitler. And then, of course, after the war, it was done in the United States, and then in Britain and France and Brazil. This idea, just organizational, of a limited access highway. Okay, well, that's nice. That's nice, Professor McCloskey. But what caused the innovation? You say that it's innovation. It's not capital accumulation. It's not exploitation. Well, yeah, I agree. There was innovation since 1800. But was it just because of science? My answer there is a firm no. Until relatively recently, science was not a very big part of the economy. Concrete, for example, reinforced concrete especially, is an amazing material. It's got nothing to do with science, at least in its early forms. And so many other things. The idea of a canal, or the idea indeed of a superhighway, an autobahn, is not scientific. Now, of course, look, we're on Zoom on computers. Science has a great deal to do with that. But it's not science for probably 100 years. Science starts to become important around 1900, and then becomes more and more important, but still not the whole story. Mainly, it's just human ingenuity. People thinking up new things. People saying, now let's see. Let's breed the cotton plant. Cotton. Make it shorter so that the plant is putting more energy into the size of what are called bolls in English, the cotton stuff that you make into cloth. Well, that actually happened on a big scale in the United States in the 40 years before the Civil War, starting in 1861. There was an increase in cotton yields by 4 times. 4 times. And that wasn't, that didn't come from the heavens. It came from people's minds trying out things. Now, of course, this was unfortunately connected with slavery, but still, it was creative. The steam engine, the electric light, central heating, all kinds of things come from, all of these things, whether mechanical, biological, or organizational, come from people's heads. Of course, what's the big surprise? Of course they come from people's heads. But why didn't they come from people's heads before 1800? Because the deepest puzzle about the modern world is why it's modern. Why haven't we had airplanes like the wonderful airplanes that you make in Brazil? Why haven't we had airplanes since the Roman times, or I don't know, since Mesopotamia or the Mayans? Why? What's this business about the last 2 centuries? What's special about the last 2 centuries? And I've got an answer. See if you think it's plausible. If you don't think it's plausible, read my books, or at least buy them. They make very good Christmas presents. Your mother will be delighted to get all of Deirdre McCloskey's books on this matter. So here's the trick. Here's the idea. It's the birth of liberalism that made for what I call innovism, which, as I told you, is my better name for what we call capitalism. And that freed people. The core of liberalism is equality of permission. So you're allowed to try out stuff, right? You're permitted. And if you're permitted, it's new. You weren't permitted as a slave, or as a serf, or as a woman, or as a poor man, right? You were suppressed in agriculture up till the 18th century. And then in Northwestern Europe, people like John Locke in England, and Voltaire in France, Smith, Scotland, Stonecraft in England, over that century, invented, so to speak, the idea of liberalism, the idea of letting people alone, letting people try out things. And the result, and I show this in detail, was an explosion of human ingenuity. And that's what gave us our automobiles, our higher education, our long lives. Life expectancy has increased by 2.5 times since in the last 2 centuries in most countries, including now even very poor countries like Bangladesh. All this has happened because because people were liberated. So that's the convergence. And that's why it's not either on the left or the right. It's liberalism. It's leaving people alone. So as the English, this is an English expression, not an American English expression. So people are permitted to have a go. The English are very sports oriented, so they think it's fair in a game. You know, it's like football. To everyone has a go, as they get to try it out. And they did. They went, they go. They had a go. Your ancestors and mine increasingly were free to invent, to innovate. So that's my story. I haven't convinced everyone, unfortunately. My economist colleagues want to go on talking about capital accumulation, and my friends in history and sociology and so on want to go on talking about conflict, Marxist type, the history of all hitherto existing societies is a history of class struggle. I was listening yesterday to a Zoom talk by two French, and a French historian and a French sociologist, and they're trying to explain the modern world as a matter of conflict. But what they didn't account for was the Great Enrichment. The Great Enrichment of the last 2 centuries is the most important secular event in human history. Well, you might say the invention of agriculture is, and I understand that, because once you have agriculture, somewhat paradoxically, you can get urban places because the countryside can feed the city or the priests, and the city and the priests invent writing. This happened in the Mayan or Toltec civilization in Central America. It happened in China. It happened in Mesopotamia and Egypt, those 4 places. And so there's something to be said for the agricultural revolution, you could call it, that is going from hunter-gathering or indeed herding to settled agriculture as the most important event. But boy, an increase in the income per head of poor people of 4,000%, so that the descendants of the poorest peons in Brazil can become people in business, professors of economics. That's amazing. And it's not explained in the traditional ways. Now I'm gonna stop there and field some questions.
Thank you so much, Professor McCloskey, for that lecture. We have some questions here already.
Sure.
First of all, I'll give some notices in Portuguese, and then we can start
Certainly.
the section. Pessoal, eu acabei de enviar aqui nos comentários o formulário de presença e feedback. Por favor, preencham, porque isso é muito importante. Se você for um coordenador do Students for Liberty que estiver nos assistindo, preencham com o e-mail institucional para pontuarem na gamificação. Well, Professor, we're going to start the questions.
I want to say, though, I love Students for Liberty. Yes! Yay! Students for Liberty!
That's what we need most here in Brazil. More and more Students for Liberty. Well, the first question was sent by João Fernando Rossi Mazzoni, and he is asking, Dr. McCloskey, could you talk a bit about your recent book, The Myth of the Entrepreneurial State, and advise the Brazilian politicians that such a thing as an entrepreneurial state doesn't exist?
Yeah, this is with a friend of mine, Alberto Mingardi, a Italian liberal, the head of one of the few institutes in Italy devoted to freedom. And the book is mainly about Mariana Mazzucato, who's an American. Her father was an Italian engineer. She grew up in the United States and got her PhD. She's an economist at the New School in New York. And she's made a splash for about 10 years with the idea, indeed, that the state, that the government can be the entrepreneur. And we think that, Mingardi and I think that's crazy. Pazzo, loco, insane. That most innovations are made by these people I'm talking about, these people who are become free and have permission. And a great many of the projects of the government are a disaster. One that she likes very much, for example, is the Anglo-French Concorde, the airplane, the supersonic airplane, which in 30 or actually longer, more like 35 years of its existence, never made any money. No one was, the customers in general were not willing to pay enough to make this very expensive airline profitable. And if you do projects that are unprofitable, income per head in the country goes down, not up. The way income happens is not generated, as people always say, in a kind of Keynesian balloon. You blow it up and it gets bigger. No. It's ingenuity and then investment, implementing it by entrepreneurship. The idea that bureaucrats in Brasilia or Washington or London or Brussels could make innovative decisions better than business people and customers, because they're together on the ground, you can see is not very plausible.
We have here another question from Arthur Policarpo Salles. He's asking, is the Western culture a crucial piece of innovism? Given that this era is dying, could this lead to a decrease in economic growth, or such movement is non-stoppable?
Well, I think it's basically unstoppable. Once the genie has been let out of the bottle, you can't put him back. Once people have realized that free societies work better, economically and otherwise, it's very hard for them to get convinced that central planning is a good idea. Spectacular example is Hong Kong. Hong Kong after the war, 1947, was just as poor as the rest of China. Then, as you may know, it was a British colony, and it had been so for 100 years. And then the British Foreign Office basically left it alone economically. And now, of course, the mainland Chinese Communist Party is going to kill it. But now income per head in Hong Kong is almost as high as in the United States. Whereas even mainland China, which has done very well, it's still only about a third of what it is, or a quarter really, of what it is in the United States. So leaving people alone to invent is how you get advances, not by this planning, top-down planning. I think I've forgotten something else in the question. Can you remind me?
Yes, it was. Given that this era is dying, could this lead to a decrease in economic growth? Or
I don't think the liberal era is dying. I agree that there have been appalling challenges by people like Trump and Bolsonaro from the right, and Chavez and Maduro from the left in Venezuela. I agree that populism worldwide is a threat to a free society, but Russia and Turkey and so forth being examples. But I think in the long run, people want to be free. Now, they don't all want to be free. It's nice to be a child and to be safe. But as I said, I think the liberal idea and the liberal demonstration, like Hong Kong, is too powerful to be long denied. By the way, Brazil could be richer than it is if it adopted really liberal policies, because that's what India and China did. Up until 1978 in China and 1991 in India, the economy was dominated by top-down planning. And then they said, well, this isn't working out so well. And they started to move in a liberal direction. And income per head started growing at 7 to 10% per year. Brazil is lucky for it to grow at 2% per year. But you can have it if you do it.
Thank you so much, Professor McCloskey. I'm afraid our time has ended, but I only have to thank you so much for your support and for your time. It was a tremendous honor, not only for me, but to all the members of Leadership in Schools, Students for Liberty, and our general audience here.
Yay, Students for Liberty! Yay, Brazil! Not Brasilia!
Thank you so much, Professor. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.